Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whosoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whosoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me."
Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the let's try that again. Lord, unloose my tongue. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent. For on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. He sat down and called the 12. And he said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them. And taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." And so I want to reflect for just a few minutes on embracing your inner child. It is so good to be back with you after 2 Sundays away. And again, I am so deeply appreciative for Reverend Pat Hernandez and our music director, Ken Williamson, for preaching and leading worship in my absence. My time away from this pulpit included a bit of leisure, but it also included ongoing work. And so I would just like to share with you some of the experiences that I've had the last couple of weeks and how they relate to this text, with the hope that as I share these, it will also lead you to interrogate and reflect on how God is moving in your own lives in relationship to this text. Last Sunday afternoon, Mona Cochran and I were in D.C. to take part in the installation service of the Reverend Dr. Tricia Mannering. Pat was also there. And Tricia is the new executive director of the D.C. Baptist Convention. Tricia is an amazing woman and a dear friend in ministry and a truly gifted leader who I know will bring new energy to the D.C. Convention. And Tricia had requested of me that I sing a particular song that frankly was outside of my musical comfort zone. Now you know that I love to sing, but I am also very aware of the limitations of my voice and my lack of professional technique. And so when Mona and I met to rehearse that song a few days prior to the service, I struggled with the song, and I became frustrated. And I sat right there in that pew and said out loud, "Tricia, what did you do to me? Why did you ask me to sing this song?" Because all I could imagine was the pained expressions that I would see on the listeners' faces as I screeched and croaked my way through the song. People who, I will say, do not love me in the familial way that you do. People for whom I was a stranger. It triggered all of my middle school angst and insecurities. It triggered every time that I had ever been mocked or bullied. And as I sat there in that pew, struggling with that song, I was no longer the mature pastor that you see before you now. That's a laugh line. Okay. I was again the insecure child of my past who worried about being rejected and found wanted and being summarily dismissed by my peers. But thanks be to God, Mona, in her quiet wisdom, reminded me that this wasn't performance, this was ministry. And that all I needed to do was concentrate on telling the story. And so together, she and I figured out the best way to tell the story. And on the day of the installation, everything went fine. The story was told, the message was received, and I felt, rather than ridicule and disapproval, only grace and affirmation from all that were in attendance. You might even say that I and the child that I once was were welcomed and affirmed, undoing some of the wounds of the past. And 3 days after that installation service, I flew to Fort Worth, Texas, to sit in on a meeting of the American Baptist USA General Board Executive Committee, of which I am the incoming vice president-elect for 22 and 23. Now, this was the first time that I had flown in over 2 years, because who was flying a year ago? And I had forgotten how much that experience of flying ties me in knots and makes me forget my best self. That makes me forget the peace of God about which I preach so often. I don't know whether that happens to you, but it begins at the security checkpoints, where I feel scrutinized, as I am required to publicly unpack my belongings and put them out for all to see in plastic bins, as I'm required to take off my shoes and walk barefoot on floors that hundreds of others have walked on before me, as I stand to have my body scanned, and then for some reason they always think there's something in my knees, so then I also have to get frisked by people I don't know. And so aside from those intrusive services or searches, I always have this irrational fear in the back of my mind that they're going to discover 2 kilos of heroin in my bag. Headline news, Reston pastor arrested as drug mule. It never fails. And then, of course, we reach the gate. And as the time nears for boarding, there is this restlessness that we all begin to feel as people begin lining up and jockeying for position, because we all want to get on the plane ahead of everyone else. And so we look at the little number on our boarding pass to see when you will be called, and then the microphone lights up and the stratification process only makes it work. Good morning. Thank you so much for flying on XYZ Airlines. We'd like now to welcome our first-class passengers. First-class passengers only. Now, our Gold Star Club member passengers, you are free to board. Now, our Ultra Preferred passengers, welcome aboard. Now, our Preferred passengers, welcome aboard. And now, the rest of you nameless, faceless cattle who aren't preferred by anybody, welcome aboard. And our text says, while traveling along the road, they compared boarding passes and argued with one another about who was the greatest according to American Airlines. And then once on that plane, as I sit in my row or window seat, I have 2 other great concerns that cause me dread. Number 1, is anybody going to sit in this middle seat next to me? And so as people are walking down the aisle, I'm eyeing them suspiciously, saying, pass me by, pass me by, pass me by. And so automatically there is this sense in which I am sizing up people, and I'm sure they're sizing me up as well, to see how three of us are going to sit across the row. And then there's that second dread. Are there babies on board? On my flight to Fort Worth, there were 3 babies. Yes, 3 babies. Beautiful, but all I could see was that they promised to bring wails of noise and disrupt everyone around them for the duration of the flight. I was not a happy traveler at that moment. And then I opened my computer to this morning's lectionary text, saying he took a little child and put it among them. And taking it in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. He was talking about those babies on the plane. Touché, Jesus, touché. There are systems in this world everywhere that thrive on elevating people above each other, that encourage our insecurities, encourage our self-comparisons, encourage us to feel negatively or feel hostility toward others that we think are invading our space or disrupting our peace, those people and individuals that don't belong. This world separates people into 2 classes, the winners and the losers. First class and economy coach. Important and less important. And we all fall prey to this thinking if we are not mindful and if we do not correct our thinking along the way. Because this kind of thinking, this isolating, stratifying thinking, is ungodly. It is burdensome to our spirit, and it is burdensome to the functioning of our society. Jesus in this text brings a child into the midst of the disciples. And in the ancient world, while children were treasured by their immediate families, children had no real standing in society. They had no voice, especially young children. There were probably many reasons for this, but one of them, I suspect, is that in the ancient world, 50% of children did not survive the first 5 years of life. 50% of children did not survive the first 5 years of life. And so I don't know, perhaps there was a sense in which the degree of investment that you would have in children might have been different, knowing that they may not have been with you that long. But for whatever reason, young children stayed with the women, out of the way of men unless they were helping to serve. Children were the lowest on the rungs of society when it came to having agency or having a voice, even more so than today. They were not actively despised. They were just somewhat inconsequential until they reached a certain age. You know, when you think of the ritual of bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs and things like that, there was a point in which children were integrated into the wider society, trained for taking their place in the wider society. But that did not happen for young children, especially in the company of men. And yet, in response to the disciples' argument about greatness, it is a child that Jesus puts into the center of them. And that child was probably in the room because he or she was serving. They brought a loaf of bread to the table. I'm reminded of the fact that throughout history, servants often made great spies in times of war because important people were impervious to their presence. They would discuss sensitive matters, battle plans, and the like right in front of the servants because the servants were invisible to them. They did not count. They didn't warrant acknowledgement or consideration. And so many of the servants, I'm thinking particularly of like during World War II, during the Nazi regime, during the Civil War, there were servants who actually gathered information, right, and then passed it on to the other side because they were privy to so much, because they were invisible even as they stood right in front of them. But Jesus calls this child right into the center of these important disciples who had been jockeying position. And not only does he call the child into their midst, he puts his arms around the child. They weren't on display. They were welcomed. And Jesus says to the disciples, so you want to be important. You want to be more like me. You want to be close to me. Well, if that is the case, start here. Start here by seeing the invisible. Start here by not only seeing but embracing this child. And do the same with the poor, with the women, with the children, with those who are aged or struggle from infirmities. Embrace them, see them, serve them. And as you serve them, honor them, knowing that you honor me and you honor the one who sent me. So today, beloved brothers and sisters, we have another opportunity to be mindful of how we engage with the world. We have another opportunity to reflect on the ways that we buy into this dog-eat-dog world. And it is a day for us to lay down again the baggage that comes from striving for status. Lay down the baggage of winners and losers. And so leave today with renewed eyes of compassion. As you walk out the door after this service, may you see people who had become invisible to you. And may you elevate them in your estimation as an act of the will through the power of the Holy Spirit. And in those instances, those other instances, when you yourself feel beaten down, when deep feelings of unworthiness are triggered, when you question your importance and your place in the world and whether anyone sees you, hears you, or cares, perhaps wounds being triggered from all the way back in your childhood, then in those moments, remember also that Jesus didn't just throw this child into the center of the circle and ask that child to fend for itself. Jesus embraced the child. It says he took the child in his arms. That may be the only place in the text where it says he took someone into his arms. Jesus embraced that child. He protected that child. And that same embrace can hold all of our fears, all of our struggles, all of our questioning and despair. That same embrace of our loving God can comfort you when you are low, can rock you in love and provide healing shelter. That is the embrace that will free you from the baggage of past hurt and pain. And that embrace will never, ever let you go. And so on this day, beloved, God is telling us that it is time for us to check our baggage so that we can walk and dance freely and in love. Amen. And may it be so.